I need to make a little guy.
Hello, I'm Jamie, creator of Route 6.6, but I don't just like making audio content. When I build a world, I take that pretty literally. I want to build the world. And I'm making the Squarmadillo from Behringer 1902. Now, what is a Squarmadillo, you might be asking yourself? Well, basically an alien armadillo. The only reference to it in the show to date is actually in episode 2, where Gil and Ro run over a road-killed one. Now, if you're from anywhere in the American South, you are probably familiar with the natural state of the armadillo being roadkill. Now, that's really unfortunate because they're very cute when they're alive, and I decided I wanted a version of my own fictional one. Now I'm gonna stop rambling because if you've seen the timestamp on this video, you know that we need to get it moving, so follow me there. So we're starting with a sketch here, and the most important thing I wanted to figure out is how to make this guy curl up, because much like his namesake, he's going to be able to roll into a ball. I'm just kind of eyeballing it out at this point, trying to feel how big the final product is going to be in my hands, and then measuring that versus a quilting ruler. I really like these because they're transparent and have a lot of gradation marks, and I use it for a lot more than just quilting. If his diameter is 6 inches, we can do some simple calculations to get to how big his circumference is going to be, and that'll tell us how long the shell and the spine need to be. And that's going to be sort of our guiding light for the rest of this project. Because once the spine length is down, I can basically eyeball everything else based on that. So we come out to a result of about 18 inches, and I think that's going to result in a pretty good little armature here. Now, for some reason, I decided to put 12 legs on this guy, and also approximately 6 back plates. So now I have to divide that circumference to figure out how long each back plate is, resulting in 3.5 inches. So this is going to inform how I make the different segments of the shell, because now we're going to have 3.5 by about half the circumference to get that ball shape. And I always draft my own patterns for most of what I'm making. Here we have the half circumference coming in for the length. And then the 3.5 inches, and I'm just grading out the curve in between those measurements to get a more organic shape. And rather than try to cut it all out symmetrically, I'm just going to fold it and cut it once, because that's going to result in 4 more or less equivalent sides. Now, wherever possible, as part of my process, I try to recycle, because crafting can reduce a lot of waste. And this kind of cardboard was just lying around the house, so it's gonna get used. And now I'm just going to carry over the measurements from the template onto each of the 6 plates that I've created here. That way I have center lines going in both directions, and also marking out where I want the overlap to be, sort of that allowance between each of the plates. And now we're going to work on the rib bones. This is just basic dowel from the craft store. I think it was less than $1 for this piece. And I love this tool. This is one of my favorite tools. It's great for miniature making. It's great for cutting anything small. Now this dowel is going to be what I use to force the cardboard into that curve shape. And this curve is not quite deep enough for what I wanted, so we're going to kind of just eyeball it, lop off a section that I think looks about right, and measure it again. So that is a much better looking curve. It's much closer to a half circle. I think it's going to serve really well for a shell segment. So now I just need to attach that rib bone that we've created to the outer shell. Now we're moving on to the spine. This is going to be the part of the armature that holds the entire build together, so it's pretty critical to get it right. Now what I like to do is use aluminum armature wire, or floral wire, or whatever you call it. It's in the garden section at Michael's, but it serves great for this purpose because it's flexible, but it has enough rigidity to hold poses, and it's really easy to manipulate. We're going slightly in excess of 18 inches so that I can get a bend on either side. That way we don't have wire poking out of our finished critter and into whoever's hands are holding him. So now we have our spinal cord. Now we need our vertebrae that we're going to stack onto it. My preference is to use wooden beads of various sizes to mimic the various cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. It's really not all that technical. I'm just going to use increasing sizes of beads towards the center of the spine, and then we're going to taper it off towards the opposite end. And the curve in the end of the wire is also going to ensure that our beads stay in place. There, we have a nice tail going. And I'm just feeling it out as I go, comparing the sizes of the beads to each other, just making whatever feels right. This is where the art takes over from the science. Now we're just closing off the other end. And now we have a complete working spine that's fully posable and highly flexible. Voila! We're just going to line up the existing shell pieces against the spine that I've created, make sure everything's a good fit, and also, importantly, test if all of the pieces are going to come together in the way that I hope that they do. So we're just going to be using this clear packaging tape for a temporary hold, and we're going to be mocking up the structure, because we're hoping that this is going to roll up like a real armadillo, and that's going to require a little bit more engineering than in a typical little critter that I would build. And as I'm attaching each of the ribs onto the shell, and the shell is attached to the spine, it's already starting to naturally take the shape that I hope it will once this project is finished. And that's a pretty good sign. I love to see it. And we have our test curve. It's working. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. This is the part of the project where I really knew that I could commit to it. So our next part here is doing a more permanent attachment of the ribs to the shell, and we're using some more of that aluminum armature wire, cutting it in excess of the length of the rib. And now, ladies and gentlemen, and those otherwise defined, I am happy to present duct tape. Basically what I'm doing is making a little sushi roll of the wooden dowel rod and the aluminum armature wire that will hold together through a lot of flexing. Now we start getting into dangerous tools. This scratch awl is going to poke a hole just large enough through our shell that the wire should be able to poke through, and then I can insert the rib through the shell piece and bend the wire to help lock everything in place. I'm recording this voiceover on a day where a thunderstorm's rolling in, which is probably a bad idea, but here we are. Cutting out little darts in the duct tape to make sure that it's able to fasten across the curved contour of the shell. Now we're going to work on making the shell look a little bit more organic. I have this other grade of cardboard, other thickness, that I'm using to add a curvature, a lump, to the back of each of the shell pieces. That way it's not just a series of flat segments that would make it look more mechanical than organic. And then I'll be preparing the leathery skin of the Squarmadillo shell using everyone's favorite crafting material, EVA foam. I'm making sure to measure out a little bit of excess, so that way once I cut out the pieces, I'll be able to fold the edges of the EVA foam over the sides of the shell pieces. This is going to have the effect of having a nice smooth edge and give a little bit more depth, a little bit more texture to the final piece. Do these look a little bit like brass knuckles? I feel like they look a little bit like brass knuckles. Anyway. Now I'm going to douse the entire side of this thing in wood glue. Make sure it has a nice even spread, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That way we get a good hold. And now I'm going to cheat and get a nice 2-in-1 effect, gluing 2 pieces of EVA foam at the same time. And that also saves on some excess that would probably have spilled over if I had just tried to glue each of these pieces individually. Now for more temporary hold, we have the triumphant return of clear packaging tape. And this part is monstrously tedious, but once you see the final product, it was really worth it. The trick to this is making sure that I'm pulling even tension across the EVA foam, that way it's not pulling to one side or the other of the piece. Let's see if this worked. Okay, I think that's a success. I mean, I need to fold the rest of the edges over, but I just needed to get that initial hold in, so I'm gonna call that a win. Now for this next phase of attaching the skin to the shell, I'm going to be using super glue instead of wood glue. Wood glue has an incredibly strong hold, but it takes a long time to dry. And I want a quick hold because tension is our enemy here. The EVA foam is going to want to spring back to its original form, and I just need to really quickly glue and tape it down as I go. And I'm using the craft knife to cut out excess of the foam because as you come around the curve of this piece, you would get bunching and wrinkling otherwise, and we don't want any of that. There, we have a nice smooth finish. Here comes the dowel rod once again. The measurements are not going to be so precise in this part of the project because I'm not looking to achieve mathematical precision like I was with the curvature of the shell. This is just making some armatures for the little leggies that feel like they're about the right length. We're using a lot of familiar materials. We got the wooden dowel rod, we've got the wooden beads, and I'm going to be stringing it all together using some more of that armature wire and taping it into place. Now, what I like about using this combination of materials is that it flexes at the joints, but the wooden pieces act like bones and kneecaps. And once you start putting on the extra soft layers over top of this, it really feels like a skeleton underneath, which means that the final figure is going to be moving in a much more naturalistic way, even if no animal shaped like this has ever walked the face of the earth. I don't know if I've ever seen a 12-legged mammal-esque thing, but today we will. And just look at that leggy action. Do a little mock fit against the shell, and I'm feeling good about the proportions at this point. So we're just gonna keep repeating, and we bend the wire at the ends into an approximate foot shape, which we're gonna refine later. Off camera, I made this one unique shell piece. If you remember from the sketch, there was more of a banded shell segment. This is mimicking the real-life armadillo, but it's also a really cool texture and something that I enjoyed playing with. I'm thinking since we do have a good reference creature in the form of the American armadillo, it has sort of a shell texture similar to a basketball, sort of dimpled. So we're probably going to play in that space, maybe with some weird modifications if I feel like it. So let's get going. So the way we're going to achieve that basketball dimple texture is with fabric puff paint. This stuff has a wide variety of applications. I really played with it a lot on this project. I'm really happy with the final results once we get there. The squeezy tube leaves you with a lot of control, and you can do all kinds of shapes and textures and surfaces with this really cheap material, honestly. I was really impressed to see what it could do. And now that it's all assembled, it looks a lot like a car tire.
When the roadkill decides to kill back.
And I've made sure to number all of the pieces so I know what order they go back together in. Now there's one more shell piece that I didn't account for in the original plan for this, so I'm just going to double back and really quickly mock up the shape of that sort of mouth head plate thing using a lot of the same materials as before. Just eyeballing this, making sure that it's proportionally about correct. We're feeling pretty good about it, so we're just going to commit to that shape. Now, the fabric paint is a good material and so is EVA foam, but I want to make sure that we're sealing it That way it gives it a little bit of extra strength, it takes paint a little bit better later on, and basically holds our entire surface together in one uniform texture. And I'm stippling after I brush it on to get rid of all those nasty brush strokes and make sure that we have a nice even coating across the entirety of the piece. Back to the leggies, I'm just getting a sense of how chonky we want to make the musculature. This is where the soft layers start coming in. This is just polyester batting you can get from any craft store. It's usually used for quilting, but not today. That's kind of a theme that's emerging with this project. So once we have an appropriately sized section of musculature, we're going to use pins to temporarily fasten them into place and hold the correct amount of tension to the central solid core that we're working on. And the great thing about using needle and thread here is that as I begin to wrap the thread around the piece, it's not only binding the different layers of material together, it's allowing me to play with and manage the tension around the polyester batting as I go. So we're going to taper this, make sure that it's compressed down harder at the ankles so we don't end up with Squarmadillo cankles. We're going to contour it to the knee shape and the thigh shape and make sure we have distinguishable anatomy. And because we are adding so many layers of material, I am going to be periodically doing flex tests to make sure that this armature still moves in an organic way. So now we have a nice, shapely calf and thigh. Flex, flex. We have a full range of motion still. And the thighs are thick, but are they thick? I don't think we're quite there yet, so we're going to add on another layer of polyester batting just to the upper section. And now that I'm more or less happy with this muscular structure, much like every other part of this project, I'm going to have to do it 11 more times. But for now, let's work on the feet. So once again, I'm just eyeballing this around the shape of the curved wire that we have so far, making some little toe beans, cutting out the initial template, and then we'll do it 11 more times. And I genuinely have no idea where this foam came from. It looks like it was part of a packaging layer, but it's going to be perfect for making a little bit of feet meat. I'm so sorry I just said that. Put a little split in there so we can fit it onto the wire. And we're using needle and thread to bind it all together. looking good so far. Wood glue returns to help bind everything together, but we're going to make sure this is extra secure by using needle and thread to make sure we have an immediate hold while the wood glue sets. And then we do it 11 more times. And I thought the right angle that the foot was forming with the rest of the leg was a little bit harsh, so I cut out a little bit more of that foam to make a bit of an instep to gradually curve up into the rest of the foot. And these are not fresh-baked sugar cookies, but rather bits of EVA foam cut to the same foot template covered in purple fabric paint. This is going to create more of a skin-like texture for the bottom of the toe beans. And now, our mighty soldiers are ready to march to battle. You know, they say there's more than one way to skin a Squarmadillo, but this is the only way I know. The benefit of using this stretch suede material is that it's a little bit fuzzy, which will help with making it feel like a creature, and it's also flexible. As I sew the material onto our project, we are going to be able to stretch it and make it form to all the complex organic shapes that we've spent so much time forming so far. We're going to fold one side, pin it, wrap it around the rest of the leg, and then fold all the excess towards the interior. So we have two folded edges facing against each other. That way we're going to have no ragged fraying edges exposed anywhere on the outside of the piece. And when we sew this, we're going to be using sort of a doll maker, toy maker technique, where we're going to be doing an invisible stitch. So right now I'm just fastening and closing up the top side of our leg stump here, which is, you know, not unlike a Victorian surgeon sealing up an amputee's leg. So we're employing what is called either a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch, depending on who you ask. Basically what happens is you're passing your thread to the interior of your piece on the diagonal. That way, the straight stitches where you're crossing back to the other side are really short and really hard to detect with the naked eye. So we end up with a relatively invisible seam, and that's what I want. I'm not wanting this to look like a doll at the end. I'm wanting it to look like a critter. And as we get down to the foot, I'm having to change strategy a little bit. The invisible stitch is no longer appropriate because we have some wrinkles going on. It looks a little bit like a Shar-Pei at this point. I don't hate that, but what I'm also wanting to do is make sure that I'm managing the excess fabric. So we have a ton of excess that we can just snip off at the foot area of this armature right now. Once I have all of that mess cut down, I can use our excess thread to pull the remaining pieces of our fabric-y Muppet flesh tight around the bottom of the foot. And I'll be tying a knot periodically since we are fighting with tension. We're going to want to make sure our progress is locked into place pretty regularly. And we're basically just using a modified whip stitch at this point because we're just spiraling over and over and over the layers of our material. I'm paying special attention to tensioning the area of fabric near the toes. That way we make sure we have nice definition on those sharp creases. And now we have a skinny leg. There's a little bit of wrinkling here, but honestly, it's not the end of the world. And we're doing another flex test at this point just to make sure everything's moving like I want it to. We have some skin gathers in slightly unnatural places, but honestly, for the entirety of this being handmade from scraps, I'm pretty happy with where we're at so far. Just test fitting our foot pad on the bottom of the sewn up foot. I think all those pieces are going to come together quite nicely. So having super glued those into place, we have a completed set of leggies. Now I just have to do it 11 more times. 11 more times. I'm fine. I'm fine. But finally we get to move on. So in addition to the previous head piece I didn't account for, there's all the tail pieces that I need to account for. And I used some black fabric paint to fill in some of the gaps created when I cut into the EVA foam to make it fit those curves. So now we have a nice cohesive piece, and we get to add some final color. As you can see, I'm not a dedicated fan of any one brand of cheap acrylic craft paint. I've been collecting these bottles for years and years. I inherited some of them, so some of them are a little, used up, maybe. Yeah, this one's no good. Maybe this one. Nope. How about this one? Okay, third time's the charm. So yellow doesn't look very great going directly over black. I want to have a little more color variation than that anyway. So we're going to be base coating these pieces in a brown pattern. Just kind of varying it up between different red tones and yellow tones across the different textures, playing with stripes, playing with variations across the different segments of the shell. I think without realizing it, I was kind of basing the paint scheme here off of various desert snakes. just stippling on the final color and not really doing much work to try to blend it together, because once we do our top coat in the final yellow, it's going to help blend those different colors together anyway. And I'm a little sad because once I pull in the final yellow top coat, we lost a lot of this definition that I spent so much time adding here, but the original sketch is this very bright raincoat yellow, and I wanted to stick with that because it looks great with the purple and green that I also picked for the character design. Now, the reason I wanted to go with a makeup sponge for this part is I wanted the yellow to act more as a glaze than just glopping a bunch of paint on. Again, I still lost a lot of definition between the different colors, but some still does come through, and I can credit that with basically using a dry sponge technique. Not quite dry brush, since this is a makeup sponge after all. I'm also not too worried about getting an even coat of yellow at this point, because a little bit of organic variation just lends to the fact that this is supposed to be a living creature, and no living creature is perfect. Now for the larger pieces, I was able to use those wooden ribs to help them hold a curve. I had to glue and tape these bits of armature wire to help them hold a curve. Now, just as a precaution, we're painting the interior of each of the shell pieces, because when our boy curls up, any part of the interior is exposed, I don't want this white cardboard showing through. So the plan here is to glue that bit of scrap canvas fabric along the length of all of our shell pieces in their final configuration to help hold them together, in addition to the spine holding them together. I'm making sure this gets fully saturated with wood glue, working it through the fabric as well as on the face of the fabric that the shell is attached to. That way it should form basically just a block that holds everything into place. Now, this is a powder blue. I don't want it showing to the outer surface of the finalized piece. So we're going to basically make little sleeves of the purple plush fabric and string them onto the canvas between each of our Squarmadillo plates as we're pulling this together. And these are just some quickly sewn together tubes of fabric. Disguise is the name of the game at this point. And it's kind of like stringing together a really weird necklace. finalized Squarmadillo shell in action with full flexibility and range of motion. It's light, it's strong, it's cute and adorable, and rolls up perfectly. Look at that, folks. So do a little fold test. And, well, there's still some raw material visible on the interior, and I'm a perfectionist, I just can't have it. So we're going to take some more of our purple material, cut it to the contour of the inside of the shell, and just wrap it around that exposed bit of duct tape. Is all this extra work necessary? Probably not. Did it make me feel good? No. Do I like the final result? I have to admit yes. So it was all worth it in the end, despite the pain of this additional step that was extraordinarily tedious. We can finally fasten the legs to the shell using a combination of duct tape to have the initial hold and armature wire to make sure that the two dowel rods get held into a stable position relative to one another. We're going to wrap that in yet another layer of both duct tape and yarn to make sure that everything is held together very tightly, very securely, so it does not shift around as we're trying to pose this guy. When it comes to critical structural elements and projects like these, I prefer to have redundancy. And more duct tape. I did say I like redundancy. And now he gets to kick his little feeties. And look at our boy. He's almost in his final form. This is everything I wanted it to be. Look at his little butt. Okay. So here's our head plate that's going to form the basis of the rest of our head. I created a template for the interior of the mouth, and we're just going to be cutting a piece out of foam core because it's light, it's strong, it's easy to manipulate, and you can get it for $1. We're going to be taking some of that packaging foam from earlier to make, for lack of a better word, the lips of our creature by folding it over on itself and adding some fabric over top of that. Sort of a taco configuration, or maybe a pita pocket. And now with the test fit successful, we're just going to sew all the pieces of his lower lip together. And there you have it. One more test fit just to make sure we're conforming to the shape like we want to. And oh yeah, I think that's going to work out just fine. So I've painted up the mouthpiece in black because again, we don't want any of the white raw material showing through. And I'm going to use wood glue to fasten everything together and pins in the meantime while the wood glue sets. And jump scare! These armatures are going to be his little mouth tentacles. And I found at this point that I originally planned for 8 mouth tentacles. Later this drops down to 6 because once I fatten all of these tentacles out with upholstery foam, there just wasn't enough room for 8 to fit in his mouth. So I had to do a little dental surgery. So upholstery foam is sculptable in the same way that most other materials are. Just get the right tools, in this case, a craft knife and scissors, and just cut away until you get the shape you want. I initially tried to use a scratch awl to poke a hole up through the foam, but there was just too much friction to actually pass the armature wire up through that hole, so eventually I doubled back and just cut a slit into the tentacle so that it could form over top of the armature wire. That of course meant that I then had to sew it in, but we've worked so much with needle and thread on this project so far that a couple of extra seams didn't hurt. And it also gave me the opportunity to, much like with the legs, manage tension on the material, which I then repeated using a layer of yarn to help sculpt the foam into a more tentacle-y shape. This had the added benefit of also binding the layers of material together and also providing a better surface for the next layer to adhere to. So this is already turning out quite nicely. But tentacles aren't fuzzy, at least these ones aren't. I might have a fuzzy tentacled creature at some point in the future. And to address that, we have the triumphant return of fabric paint. So I'm just going to be globbing a layer of this onto our armature foam. Because we have those layers of yarn there, it's able to soak in while it dries and basically form a skin, with those fibers acting as sort of a structural layer that'll keep it from shifting and tearing later on. It looks a little lumpy right now, but as it dries, it sinks into the material and smooths out a bit. Now, I did have to do this in 2 layers because when this first layer dries, there's still a lot of orange fibers poking through and some lumps and bumps that I just went in with a pair of nail clippers, actually, clipped off and trimmed down to the shape I wanted to see, and then put a second layer of the fabric paint over top to smooth it out. As you can see, we still have excellent posability. It's a nice grippy texture. He's going to be able to hold things with his mouth. Look how gross that looks. It's perfect. So our boy's mouth is sorted out. Look at that range of motion. And I did a similar thing with the eye stalks, and what I'm most proud of with this part is actually the eyes. I used some craft store grapes because they had the perfect color, they had a gradient that mimicked the original sketch with the dark center, and yeah, it's just the same layers of wire and yarn and fabric paint. I made some additional foam pads covered in our purple fabric to make essentially cheeks to help fill out the area between his mouth bone and the top of his shell. And there's his little face. There is a sketch detail I had in there where there's sort of a cowling around the eye stalks. And I just did the same thing I did with the lower lip, basically making a pita pocket of that foam plus the purple fabric, stitching it together so that it forms either an M shape or a shitty drawing of a seagull, depending on how you want to think about it. Now, this is going to help hold the eye stalks into place, and it's also going to help fill out that area to make sure there's no voids or gaps between the layers of shell. And I'm just going to use needle and thread to sew this to the cheekbones. Those cheeks are wood glued onto the mouth bone. And the needle and thread is just helping us coax this sort of fleshy cowling into the correct shape. So we have our little bendy ends that we can help clip the eye stalks in. And he's looking at you. Now I'll just have to cut away the excess and sew the cowling together. Taping in the armature segments just to make sure they don't slide out the back. And now I'm just trimming the excess and sewing the cowling together. This is just a basic whip stitch, don't need to do anything fancy because this section is going to get covered by the head bone. And as the thunder rolls in, I'll go ahead and point out the additional little bit of fabric and fluff that I added to once again help fill out the underside curvature of the head bone. And now we have our boy's head. Those pins are currently holding the mouthpiece to the face bone while the wood glue sets. But also the lower lip has been sewn to the cheekbones. So we have multiple layers holding our guy together. Right now I'm just using needle and thread to take out the slack and cover up any exposed bits of material. We are back onto the spine. I had to add a little bit of extra armature wire to account for the length of the tail. But we are going to take some more of that upholstery foam and sort of flesh out, add musculature to our spine. And this will also keep it from bending excessively and being too floppy. So we're just going to contour this into a rough, fat tail shape. And do as I say, not as I do. Don't hold your piece while you cut it like that. So we're just cutting a slit. That is my wife's hand. Cutting a slit into the tail so we can insert the spine, pinning it in place and sewing it up. And then making a little sausage roll out of some more of the polyester batting. And then, what am I doing? And now at long last, we can finally pull it all together. So in order to create his abdomen skin and finally seal up all the different parts, I'm having to basically draft a pattern for a little Squarmadillo vest. And this requires some measurements of the armature and some guesses at how the fabric needs to taper and an allowance for his tail, resulting in this weird bullet-shaped thing. And I cut it out. It was relatively straightforward. But what was not straightforward was actually sewing it into the shell. So I had to pin the center line of the pattern piece to the fabric spine that I glued to the back, And getting in there with the sewing needle, not the easiest thing. But then I was able to sew up the slits that allowed me to fit the skin around the little rib bones that I created. And you can see his little feeties tucked in to stay out of the way of the thread slinging around all over the place. And I also had to hem all of these raw edges prior to starting, so every step of this project was monstrously tedious, but I only have myself to blame. But now we get to putting his head onto his body. He looks so great and so friendly. And I'll just be attaching him by sewing the head to the body. Starting from the center out, that way I can manage how closely everything is tied together a little bit better. We're doing a ladder stitch here, not so much for invisibility, but because it also allows you to leave slack and then pull it taut later, which I'm doing right now. And then we go from center to the other side. And we wrap some extra thread around the first rib just to make sure it's anchored not just by the top, but also by the bottom lip as well. And so we have a nice degree of stability coming through, and his head's attached. So now we have him splay these leggies out so I can get access to his guts. And we're going to be leaving most of this void, because in order for him to be able to still roll up successfully, he's going to have to be mostly empty. So here we have our spine sausage getting inserted, and the nice bonus to having all that stuffing in there is that it's going to be pinned in by the ribs as well as being tacked in by the thread. If I thought the sewing of the skin to that canvas strap was tedious, this was worse, having to work in between all of the existing pieces for the entire length of the critter. But we finally reached the tip of the tail. And now we're putting in some extra polyester batting to make his flanks and flesh out his sides a bit. Making sure to anchor the ends of his flanks to the tail. And now it's time to plumb that rum. The most critical part of any crafting project is making sure it has a fat ass. In all seriousness, I didn't want the skin back there to be super saggy, but also I want him to be a nice, plump, appealing shape, and part of that is having a thick booty. Alright, now we're adding in the final layer of sort of musculature. I guess you could call this his abs. Such as they are. They're about as fluffy as mine are. And we'll be tacking down all along the perimeter just to make sure everything holds together. We don't want anything shifting after his skin gets sewn up. And finally, we work on closing him up. So my approach to this was to seal up each of the sections around each of his legs, because once again, tension is our enemy here. We worked with the stretch fabric to make sure we have good contours, but it's going to pull itself apart unless we anchor it. And it turns out that his thighs are a good place to anchor his tummy skin. So here we are. And here he is with his entire center seam done up except for the back. And as we work on cinching up the skin on his booty and trying to work out all the wrinkles, I'd like to thank you all for watching this very long video. I hope to put out more videos making more things from this world in the future. I hope they're not all this long because it has taken me since February to put this together. I'm very proud of it, but frankly, it's not sustainable for me to do videos this big all the time. But man, it's been fun. And I'm looking forward to sharing what our boy looks like as we fade into the reveal. So I'll just leave you with these dulcet tones as we fade to black. Look at my beautiful baby boy. Do you think he has my eyes? Oh, he turned out so well, and I'm so happy with this build. He's got nice flexibility. His face is fully posable and has so much personality. And honestly, I think the only note is he no longer fully curves into a sphere. He mostly just shrimps, but that has its own kind of charm too, I think. And just look at him. Is this a face that you can, like, say no to at all? I know I can't. I would give the world to this Squarmadillo. And that's it for today. Thank you for sitting through this very long video with me and my beautiful son. I hope to be sharing more creations with you in the future, preferably in a shorter video format. But in the meantime, check out Route 6.6, check out our socials. We have a Patreon as well. I'll be linking all those in the description. And check out all the other cool and exciting projects that Goblin Booth Productions has coming out. And until next time, we'll see you later.